I reach quorum. So welcome everybody. I'll begin this meeting by reading out the Native Solidarity Statement. We'd like to acknowledge that Concordia University is on the traditional territory of the Ganyan-Gehaga, a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst nations. The Concordia Student Union recognizes and respects the Ganyan-Gehaga as your traditional custodians of the lands and waters on which we meet today. So, as far as roll call goes, if you folks saw the attendance sheet is on the podium, please sign it if you haven't already at some point in the meeting. An additional point for roll call tonight is going to be the appointment of the council secretary. So Caitlin sends her regrets, but unfortunately she has seriously hurt her wrist playing soccer and it had to be put in a cast, so there will be no typing for her for at least a solid month. Though she tells us that she's already doing better and she says hello to everybody. But in the meantime, Cassandra has generously offered her help tonight, and so we would need just a motion to appoint her for the duration of the meeting. Michael.
I move to approve Sandra as temporary secretary.
Okay. Seconded by Vicky. Does anyone have any objection to appointing Sandra for the duration of this council meeting? So I'll take that as a unanimous vote. Thank you very much. Okay. So as far as roll call goes in terms of absences, I have two that I've received emails from. The first is from Terry, the counselor, who writes that I'm messaging you to notify you that I will be absent for this week's council meeting because I will be needed at a workshop organized by the Conseil juridique des artistes de Montréal. I'm meeting with legal interns as well as entertainment attorneys and this is only available for this day of the event. Please extend my excuses to the rest of council. Sincerely, Terry. The other excusal I have is from Heather, who writes, please excuse my absence from tonight's meeting. I'm dealing with some personal problems that have caused me to take a sick day. I'm sorry I won't be there to answer your questions regarding finances, but as you can see from the document submitted, we are currently in good financial standing and on target within the annual budget. I will shed more light and discuss this at length at council at the next meeting. For any urgent questions, please email me. I truly apologize for any inconvenience. Sincerely, Heather. Michael, do you have a question?
I move to excuse the absences of Terry and Heather.
Okay, that's the motion to excuse both the executive and the counselor. Seconded by Vicky. Okay, so those in favor of excusing both Terry and Heather, please raise your placards. Those opposed? And any abstentions? 2, 3, 4. 4 abstentions. Okay, that carries. Thank you very much, and that does it for excusals. Which takes us to point 3, the approval of the agenda. So are there any changes that need to be made to the agenda? Oh, okay. Start, Gabe.
Yeah, I'd like to make 2 changes. The first one being that we merge point 9B with 5A.
Okay, yeah, that's right. Those do seem very similar. Could we maybe just strike point 9B from the agenda?
Yeah, I guess that's fine.
Okay. Thank you. And was there a second point?
Yeah, and the other one is to table point 9C to the appropriate committees. And then if questions arise, we could just talk about it in question period.
Okay. So to refer the elections to which committee?
Point 9C. Well, the 2 committees would be Finance Committee and Policy Committee.
Finance and Policy. Ben, do you have to comment on that?
No, actually, no.
Okay. So the Finance and Policy Committee, you're aware that this point is going to be addressed by them first. Yes, Michael.
I'm just kind of unclear. Can I just ask Gabe for some clarification as to what the business would have been had we discussed it here?
It was just going to be, we were just going to talk about the privatization question.
Pardon me?
We were just going to talk about the privatization question that went out.
Okay.
But we're just going to send it through committee first anyways, because initially all the other policy documents that we sent out were to be sent directly to committee.
Okay.
I just sent them out so that the board could get a look at them.
Okay,
cool.
But Finance Committee and Policy Committee need to look at them. But specifically I put it on to address the privatization question, but we'll just pass that through committee as well first.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Does anyone else have any other questions or changes they'd like to make to the agenda? Jessica.
For returning business, the greenhouse, I was just Usually there's a categorization for like returning business informational and returning business substantive. So I just want to say it was informational.
Oh, okay, sure. I can definitely make that change now. Thank you very much. James, did I see your placard go up?
Yeah, I just had a question. The CSU report on the CSU General Election Policy Needs document that went out, that one pager. I wanted to know if there was an agenda point related to it, or if it was supposed to go through a committee approval, or
Could somebody speak to that?
I don't know who drafted it.
There's no agenda point for it.
Okay.
But it should be looked at by policy as well.
Okay, so it's going to policy committee?
I mean, it should be, yeah. That's the one that's drafted by the CEO, if I'm not mistaken.
No, the CSU General Election Policy, actually, sorry, the top of it says prepared by you, CSU Membership Policy and Council Committee on the 23rd. Needed policy changes. And there's just a red and black one.
Sorry, yes. Okay, you're talking about that document? Yeah, that's to go into policy.
Okay.
Yeah. Originally, that one was always supposed to go there. I was just sending it out so people could have an idea of what's happening.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so are there any further changes, or does anyone want to pull something from the consent agenda? Yes, James.
I want to pull the Appointments Committee report, please, from January 20th.
Okay. Appointments Committee report can then go into, should we say new business informational? Make that 8D.
That works.
Okay. Great. Any other changes to the agenda? Anything pulled from the consent agenda? I'll be sending everybody a finalized version of the agenda on the Facebook group. Okay, great. So in that case, we can proceed to a vote for the approval of the agenda then. I'll need a motion. Michael.
Approve the agenda with the stated changes.
I second.
Okay, great. Seconded by Vicky. Those in favor of approving the agenda, please raise your placards. Those opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, great. That carries. Thank you very much. This takes us to point 4, the consent agenda. If there's no discussion on it, we can simply move to approve it. So those, or a motion rather, so I can entertain either a conversation or a motion to approve the consent agenda. Lucy?
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Okay.
I second.
Seconded by Vicky. Those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please raise your placards. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Great, that carries. Thank you very much. So, for presentations and guest speakers, we have our dear and now former CEO, André Marcel, who would like to give a presentation about the by-election report. Do you have everything you need for the presentation as far as setup for PowerPoint or anything like that?
In the past, I've done PowerPoint. This time, since it was sent out early, I'm just going to go over the report with people. And really, it's most importantly, it's just a time for people to ask questions if they feel anything is unclear.
Okay, and would you like people to ask questions during your presentation or
Throughout,
after? Or?
Yeah, throughout the presentation is fine.
Okay, great. So the floor is yours.
Yeah. Okay. So, presumably everybody received what I sent out, or what was sent out with council docs last week. Hopefully had the opportunity to go over it. I'm not going to read through the entire introduction again, but if anybody has any questions about what was stated in that, you're more than willing to ask. Essentially, just sort of went over the context that was going on within the election, particularly pertaining to the BDS question and situations that arose because of it. The most important parts of it were probably just the sheer overwhelming amount of correspondence I had from people that were students, people that were members of the public, people that were citizens of Israel, members of the media. It was pretty crazy. It sort of reached a climax when an organization called B'nai B'rith had a hate crimes allegation filed with them with regards to the conduct of the CSU in allowing such a prejudicial question to go to ballot. We were covered by the Montreal Gazette, the Times of Israel, CBC, and a whole bunch of other smaller sort of news outlets. Yeah, it was an event. So, can anybody think of any questions they had from the introduction? Okay.
I have a question.
Okay.
I just, could you talk a little bit about how, from your understanding, it's the first North American university to successfully hold? I found that pretty interesting.
So I did admittedly like half an hour of research into other universities and institutions that have passed BDS promotional campaigns, or they've indicated that they're in solidarity with BDS, and it's been almost exclusively exclusively to my knowledge in North American universities. It's been done at either a council meeting, so in this sort of an environment, or at an annual general meeting, which is more common. In environments nearby, there was a similar undertaking at McGill, and they actually decided that it was so controversial they have an indefinite moratorium on the ability to present the question at their annual general meetings. At Windsor, they attempted to pass it by democratic vote, and it was thrown out due to essentially procedural errors done by the elections office. It's been passed at Cornell University by council. It's been passed at UCLA by council. But nowhere could I find anywhere that had a democratic vote of any kind in any institution about it. So I think it's pretty impressive that we actually managed to get that done. Frankly, a bit shocking. Anything else? Okay, so sorry.
What kind of personal threats were given against you?
That was my question too.
Quite a lot, actually. People, no students, but people were just sort of saying that you should be aware of if you make the wrong decision based on throwing out a question or punishing people too severely or allowing it to go forwards. People were just really telling me that you should be aware for your own security. There was people that were going, like, there was an individual that was going around during the actual election who was going from station to station and kept having to be confronted by a security guard who was likely not a student because we couldn't recognize him and we looked up with security as well, who was probably just going around to try and cause problems. And he had to be removed from Loyola. Different people, like virtually all adults from the Montreal community, sending me threats, pretty much just saying you should be aware that you're jeopardizing your own security by putting your name on this. I think because my name was attached to all of the correspondence related to it, like if you look at the articles, it's my name and Ben's name, and Ben was a little bit more implicitly involved, and people didn't understand, primarily because the acronym of my title is CEO, that that my job is simply just to administer the elections and to like take what information has been given to me by you and present it. And people assume that because, again, that title is CEO, that it was part of my mandate to promote it. And so they thought I was responsible, and so they were upset. And it was both sides.
Disappointing.
Yeah.
Yes, Fatty.
Do you know if Princeton University passed its motion for BDS?
I don't. No, not offhand. I'm sorry. Okay, we can kind of go quickly through the more boring parts here. So Section A covers the people that were actually elected and by what?
I'm really sorry to interrupt, but I actually missed Fatty's question. Do you mind repeating that for the secretary?
Sure. I just asked if he knew whether Princeton University passed its BDS motion or not.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Okay, so we're going to kind of race through a couple of sections here because they're pretty bland. And theoretically, you guys should all be aware of who your new colleagues are on council and who's been elected. So Jason, sitting to my left, was elected. Scott, Malin, Taimur Tanoli, Fatty, Marie-Bière were all democratically elected. There was nothing during the ballot count that was close enough to merit a recount. So everything was gone through on the first count. So it was pretty straightforward. That's Section A and B. Section C is referendum questions. And again, there was nothing that merited a recount. As you guys are all aware, there was like a moratorium on the counting of the BDS ballots until I could talk to a lawyer. But even still, both sides were present at the actual meeting, and both sides, or at the counting of the ballots, and both sides were happy with how it was done, and were completely in agreement that it was fair. So I thought that was pretty important. Daycare center question went through, student housing center question went through, Hive Cafe question went through, education sector budget cuts went through, IEAC separation went through, Conmon fee levy went through, the IEAC fee levy did not go through, and the BDS campaign went through. So section D is expenses. Again, this is a pretty bland component of the presentation, but I still think it's pretty important to note that compared to before I took this job, like, expenses have been drastically cut. The last election prior, general election prior to when I had the job, I think just from that election, the costs were $67,000. And that's gone now down to $20,000 for a by-election, and I think last year was about 33, 34 for a general election. Forgive me for not knowing the exact number. Again, as always, the biggest expense is security. This is the first time where I really felt it was necessary, and it made me very comfortable having security guards at the ballot boxes because they were actually used twice. Never before have I ever seen a security guard do something during the elections, and I was really grateful to have them there, both as to deter people from trying to do things and from actually literally preventing people from doing things this time.
Just because you wanted to entertain questions during the presentation.
No, it's fine.
I've got Michael and then Malin, you have some questions.
Go ahead.
Thank you. On that point, actually, do you know how much security cost last by-election?
Last by-election, it would be virtually an indistinguishable man. I can look it up actually right now because it's based on how many stations. The only fluctuation will be on how many stations are actually opening during the by-election.
Okay, so you didn't put additional security officers in place because of the contention?
No, I did not.
Okay, perfect.
No, I left it exactly the same as it always had been.
Cool.
If you want, I can look it up actually.
No, that's fine.
It's okay.
I'm just curious in terms, like, I don't know if you thought about it this time, but have we ever considered using electronic ballots and not
Electronic? Yeah. Electronic ballots have been, well, not so much electronic ballots as much as online voting has been discussed really thoroughly, and I've actually talked to an organization that specializes in it a year ago, and the initial startup cost would be a lot more, for sure.
Okay.
And it was always refuted because the people were concerned about security, A, whether or not people could actually hack into the system and then just artificially put in votes. And also people had concerns about candidates themselves walking around from person to person saying, here, I've got this web page up where you can vote for me.
Okay.
And so that was generally some of the concerns that were expressed. And there was actually a pretty extensive discussion on it that I had last year with Jean and members of council, and people decided that essentially it wasn't worth it for security and for ability to people to just go through parties and have people vote for themselves.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, ballots were pretty.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
James, does it
Sorry, I had a
start?
question for you. We're on this side, so you don't see us.
Yeah.
It's fine. You mentioned the IEC separation question went through, but the IEC funding question didn't go through.
Yes.
Is it in this report, or is it not because it wasn't there? Oh, it says questions a summary of the vote, and I see the separation one, but I don't see the
Oh, the fee levy isn't in there.
fee levy approval one.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to send that out again. I've
No
got it
worries.
in another document.
And
I'm
no,
sorry.
never mind. I'll ask the other question after.
Sorry, that's my own stupidity.
No worries.
I apologize.
How
Absent-mindedness.
dare you make a human
I just
error?
noticed it now too.
Absent-mindedness. Other things, staff costs were very reasonable, especially deputy officers. The biggest reason why it was inexpensive compared to other years was because at the onset of the by-election this year, it happened a little bit late because people resigned at the last minute. And so I didn't have enough time to actually hire DEOs until quite a ways into the process. So I actually just had to do all the work myself, which was frustrating, but it's okay. Staff is like regular cost for polling clerks and ballot counters. There's very little fluctuation in that. Again, it's just based on how many stations are there. Ballots is actually something that can be complex to deal with because you have to anticipate how many people are going to vote and leave yourself a comfortable cushion where you can still have sort of stock set aside so that if somewhere's running out, you can actually fill it up and you're not wasting too much money on buying extra. So I thought we did a pretty good job of that there. There wasn't a lot wasted. Hospitality Concordia is just for the renting of the room to count ballots. Miscellaneous expenses covers things like scissors, printing when I didn't have access to the CSU sites, ballot boxes, tape, pens, largely office supplies. And then campaign reimbursements are 50% of what people spent on their campaigns.
Sorry. Hospitality charged you for a room?
Yeah.
But you're with the CSU, aren't you guys not charged for that?
To clarify,
Do you want to respond to that?
I can respond to that one, having booked quite a few.
Yeah.
You're not technically charged for the room itself.
I
You're
know.
charged for the maintenance of the room, sort of
Yeah.
like cleanup and setup.
Yeah, service.
And every student group is charged for that,
Yeah, but not if you. Okay.
including
Sorry.
CSU.
No, but that okay.
The most frustrating cost that's from the institution is always IATS. IATS charges us $25 every time we rent a laptop, and we have to necessarily rent a laptop through them because they're the only ones that have access to a secure server through their IP addresses to be able to actually look into a database that has all students, student numbers, and what their faculty they're enrolled in. So it's necessary, but the cost is astronomical when you think that we're within the university and they charge us $25 per day for each computer we use. So it's always kind of frustrating me to see that, but unfortunately there's nothing I can really do about it. Every return of expenses filed by a candidate. So you can look through it, it's really straightforward. The reason why there's homogeneous costs between the Hive, student housing, budget cuts, and daycare is because they hired the same graphic designer and printed out the same number of posters, and that was the only expenses they had. The stars just are a reference to what your referendum committee is and which are individual candidates. I was requested by a counselor to just let you guys know what the expenses were for the vote no to BDS campaign and the vote yes to BDS campaign. And I'll send this amendment to the report to the chair, and you guys can see it afterwards, but for now I'll just go through it. Vote no to BDS spent money on very normal things. There was no really controversial thing or expenses going on there. It was Office Depot, the Concordia print shop, J Graphics, which is another print shop, and Facebook advertisements. The one point of contention that some people had, where people were concerned about their pins, they thought that they were perhaps lying on the quantity of pins they had actually purchased. And an individual actually called, not me, I did later, called Chaz Consultants and asked what their minimum order was, and he told me that they said it was higher than what they had actually placed on their invoice. I had called again later and they said that that's not in fact true. And I have a proper invoice saying what they have spent and so on. So I don't see how it could have been a really big issue. They were concerned because they felt it was unfair. I looked into it to the extent that I could, and I really couldn't find any way to prove that they had printed more than they actually did. And in the future, I really don't know how to avoid a situation like that without having every single piece of information that goes out to the point that I have to count individual pins to make sure that they're not too many. It's just something that's really hard to deal with. I tried my best, but if they printed more, they did a good job of covering it. But I really don't think they did. Yes, Michael.
On that note, just for my own curiosity, if the vote no committee or any no referendum committee were to spend $1,000 for their campaign,
Yep.
what would be the consequence?
They wouldn't be reimbursed for any of it. That was
But if they really cared,
if they really cared, what would be,
and
there wouldn't be a
they were willing to
consequence.
put it in from their own pockets,
Yeah.
there's no real consequence for a vote no.
Not within our
referendum committee.
rules and our bylaws. And this is one of the things that I actually went through with the lawyer to discuss are what if an extreme action has taken place that genuinely did jeopardize the integrity of the election, what is the extent that I can do? And this has been discussed in the past, last year too. And really, docking votes is unethical, and I don't believe in it, because essentially you're taking, for every vote you dock, you're taking away one person's voice. Throwing out the question ultimately leads to one side being happy and one side being disappointed. And so in this context, if you're a no committee and the result of you jeopardizing the integrity of the election is the question being thrown out, you're happy.
That's your objective, yeah.
So no, there's a lack of control on that. And that's something that needs to be addressed.
Okay.
I don't know how. I've thought of different creative ways, but it's a very challenging situation to deal with. Because the scope of who I can keep accountable for their actions and to the extent of that I can keep them accountable is pretty limited. Like, it sort of goes back to last year when we had people that were participating as a referendum committee without having registered as a referendum committee. There's nothing, I can't hold members of the Concordia public accountable. I can only hold people that are voluntarily taking part of the elections legitimately accountable. So that's a flaw in the system that needs to be addressed, and it's a complicated one.
Sure, thank you.
Michael, what was your question?
Just what would be the consequences for a no referendum committee if they surpass their budgetary limits?
We gotta move to the speakers list now. It goes Ben, and then Vicky, and then Fatty.
Yeah, I was going to say in gray areas where there's no like specific regulation about that, it goes to the power of the CEO. So this is our current CEO's opinion, is that the way he's answering it, he's giving like the way that he would rule on it.
Right.
And the next CEO may choose differently, or they might not, I'm not sure. But either way, like even if, say, somebody sabotages a referendum, like this is possible. There are other things that we could do. Like we could revoke, for example, their ability to participate in these kinds of settings. Like they wouldn't be allowed to run for office or something because they're obviously not respecting the rules of the organization. So, I mean, I'm coming up with this on the spot. There could be stuff like that. In any event, for the actual question itself, there would be a GA called almost undoubtedly afterwards, and there's not the same kind of context. Like you can't overspend in the same way for a general assembly. So it really just draws the process out, and it kind of just makes them look like a jerk. Publicly too, and I think that people should be really public about that kind of stuff. Just like the person who made the illegal website last year. Like those people honestly should be accountable for their actions and things like this. Anyways.
The other thing you can do is if they do in fact win after
There's
like
sabotage.
unethical tactics, you can say you have to go to another election. Or the way that I find best to deal with it is if it happens early enough, I take away privileges such as the ability to campaign around campus. So if somebody, again, this only really works if it's somebody that's not part of a legitimate committee, or is part of a legitimate committee. You say, okay, you can no longer use the mezzanine hall to promote yourself, or you're not allowed to be seen around campus promoting your cause, or you can't use your Facebook account for X amount of days. But it's still pretty limited.
Fair enough.
Vicky, you're up.
Would it have been possible to basically audit the kind of like no to BDS committee?
Well, to the extent of auditing being the information they've submitted to me, but I couldn't exactly go around and count pins, which was the concern, right? The concern was the volume of pins that were actually available to the public versus the volume that were actually placed on their invoice. And it's pretty hard to keep a tab on that sort of thing.
But to have like financial audit come in and audit them.
I mean, I suppose.
That would cost more than the
But
expenses.
that's a lot
Yeah.
of money and a lot of time to put into it. Maybe if it were an extreme circumstance where it's very clear that like there's been an excessive breach, but in a context like this, I don't think it would really be worth it.
So Fanny, I have you next, but before that, Ben, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to know your thoughts, just for on the record, on, so I was told by a counselor that the minimum requirement for purchases of pins from that company exceeded the budget limit that we had.
Yeah.
And of course you said that there was follow-up with that company and that there was no special treatment given, but what are your thoughts on the contradiction between what they told somebody when they called in asking for a quote and what they told you when you called in officially as the CEO in charge of the elections? And
It's
how
concerning,
Yeah.
for sure, but again, ultimately, I can't really go beyond, like, I don't know how to investigate that further, especially because I get all this information after the fact, like after everything has already been distributed. I called, part of the form that you fill out once you have a campaign expense includes the contact information of the people that you purchase it from. I called those people and I referenced a specific invoice, and I said they ordered 200 units, they paid this much, and the invoice is completely legitimate. There's the amount that they paid in taxes. Essentially, the concern was that the company gave them a special consideration because they were sympathetic to their political cause. And it's really hard for me to conclusively say that they definitely did this with the resources that I have at my disposal. And ultimately I had to trust them. It also helped a lot that the election was over and they had lost, and they had also already lost their reimbursement. So ultimately there was no further punishment that was available. So investigating it further, which just would have been sort of added as an appendix to what had already gone on. So I didn't feel it was necessary.
Thanks.
Yeah, you mentioned the lawyer earlier,
Mhm.
but you don't know yet how much that'll cost because I saw that in your
No,
report.
no. People are really bad at sending invoices. Apparently, particularly lawyers. So I've contacted them since, and I've been in touch with Robert Henry, who would be the person that would get the invoice, or Heather, and nobody's seen it yet.
Okay.
So I sat down with them for about an hour and a half. I think he said he did about an hour of preparatory work, and so 2.5 hours of meeting with one lawyer. I don't know what their rate is, but I wouldn't anticipate that it's going to be a very excessive cost.
Okay.
It's not like going to court where they're spending
Yeah.
weeks of their time
Okay.
preparing for something. It'll be very reasonable.
But what was his role exactly like?
His role?
Yeah.
There's actually a part about that at the end of the report. Can we wait
Okay.
till we get there?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Vicky, I do again.
Would it be legal for a business to, in terms of the CSU, to basically make a donation of posters or pens to
No.
a referendum committee?
No. No, because it's not equal opportunity for all parties.
Or
There's no
to-
sponsorships. There used to be sponsorships allowed for referendum questions. It's no longer
Okay.
allowed.
Or basically for a kind of like photographer to work as a pro bono.
Again, no, I don't think so. Because the only, like, if you're having certain things that are, certain people that have access to volunteers and certain people that don't, it kind of makes the budget system and the cap system useless. Because ultimately people can solicit as many volunteers as they please. So it's like the reimbursements aren't the purpose of having a budget. It's not to give people money back for their costs. It's to keep people, it's to keep the field of play level playing field. So I was trying to spit out there. Sorry about that. Okay. Any more questions? All right. Section F is nothing. Everybody filed a return, and now this is the fun part. Section G. Okay, so I'll go through this pretty quickly at the start because these ones weren't terribly consequential. They're still worth bringing up. 2 people had issues with just where they were putting their posters. It was brought up with them and they both solved the problem virtually immediately. It was Jason and Armani. They're both very receptive and immediately dealt with the problem, which was great. I got a complaint from Malin about the conduct of the student media, including both Malin and Kyle's name in an article, which really, if you read it, it was unnecessary that their name was in there because they weren't really connected to the situation. It was discussion of the year prior's deficit, and they just sort of included 2 counselors sort of at random. Ultimately, I can't do anything to control anything from the student media. I called on Malin's behalf and said, look, what's going on? And the author of the article said, yeah, we made a mistake, and they took it out. That was it. Complaint against Kyle Arsenault from CEO. This was kind of ridiculous. Last year there was a problem where Kyle was removed from the elections for writing "baggot," which I felt was a homophobic slur. This year somebody wrote "baggot" on his official campaign page. I asked him to take it down. First he had liked it, and then he told me he didn't like it. It was all very petty. And inevitably I said, this is a warning, please don't have any more immature language on your page. He agreed, and that was that. And that was okay. It was just stupid. Okay, complaint against me from the Vote No Committee. The Vote No Committee, you guys will remember, there was a judicial board case where they felt that I was acted unfair in changing the question too late and without properly notifying them, and that the question was still prejudice. So they complained to the judicial board that I was manifestly unreasonable in my judgment. The judicial board decided to change the question, but they didn't call me manifestly unreasonable and actually have it removed. So I had prepared other ballots for like an extreme circumstance like this the day before, and they just asked for me to change the question. So it was changed from one format to another the day prior to elections. This caused quite a large issue with the Vote Yes Committee in particular, who felt that they had lost a lot of the initial purpose of their question. But I really do feel that the new question was adequate. It said what needed to be said, and it was very much unbiased. It was straight to the point. So I don't really have any regrets about their decision about that. Complaints against the Vote Yes to BDS Committee. Essentially, prior to the day after people were allowed to put up posters, the weekend after, sorry, somebody had gone around and removed all of their posters from the entire campus. I followed up with Concordia security and they found an image of one person. They couldn't identify conclusively who it was removing some posters, but they couldn't tell me who it was either way. And so for me to then extrapolate and assume that it was a member of the other referendum committee, although maybe intuitively you may think that, I can't hold them accountable for something that I don't have quantifiable evidence for, so I didn't do anything. I told them, you guys are more than welcome to go around and replace wherever you need to be, wherever like their spots were before, but they couldn't go over other candidates' posters. And I told them if need be, then we would free up more spaces for them to be able to place their posters again. And I told them that if they need be, they could have an increase in their budget so that they could actually cover the losses they had had by losing those printouts. They just sort of went around and haphazardly put a couple over the wrong, they just put them over other people's posters by accident. I asked them to go around and fixed it, and within 24 hours they did. So that was good. This number 2 was a complaint issued by me against Rami Yahia. I was a counselor that you all know. Rami was loitering around stations pretty regularly, and I saw him a couple of times and I asked him twice to move on. The third time I actually had to have a security officer engage him because after I said to move, he told me that it was within his right to be standing there. I reminded him that it wasn't. And so there was a bit of a confrontation between him and I. At this point, we had had probably about a week of tension. So I think he was more or less just emotional and angry with me and wanted to sort of make a stand. After the security came up, he agreed and he left. And that was the last time I saw Rami around any stations, and so I didn't feel it was necessary to punish the entire committee just on his behalf. During the campaign period, Rami was very disappointed in essentially my lack of action. He felt that a lot of the things that had gone on, including the posters that had been removed, what he felt was situations of harassment by members of the public against him, he felt that I was not doing my job, that I wasn't following through with anything. I mean, that he thought I was pretty much just like a wet noodle. He started to be pretty verbal in how he talked, like pretty insulting. He essentially told me on a couple of different occasions that everybody on council knew I was a joke, and that, yeah, I had lost pretty much, everybody had lost faith in me, which made me feel pretty crappy with myself, but that's all right. And so it sort of reached a climax when he told me that he no longer cared what I thought, and that he'd rather send emails to the receptionist than to me to deal with problems, and that he had plans to break many rules before the election was over. I think largely this was just him being very passionate about what he cared for and felt frustrated with what was going on. I can understand and I can sympathize to a point, but I don't think there's any place for, especially a counselor, to be insulting the person that's managing the situation. If anything, there should be there to support. Or if they can't, they should just not say anything. So I really didn't want to like attack him or anything like that with putting this out, but again, I really think openness is important, and this was something that happened, so you guys deserve to know.
So we've got Marcus and then Vicky like to address this.
Sure.
Oh, well, she's speaking before on the list, and I think it's your first time speaking on this point.
Okay. I was just going to say, if it's any consolation, I think that if we were to speak for the majority of Senate, I'm assuming we don't think you're a joke.
I know.
I would say the same thing.
Yeah.
I totally agree that you are not a joke and that you did a quite good job given this situation.
Yeah, and admittedly, I didn't believe entirely that everybody thought that I was an idiot, you know? Like, I do have a brain. But it's just, it's unnecessary and it was hurtful, and I was really trying really hard and I was very stressed out at that point, and, you know, I was very frustrated.
Yeah.
And it was just like kicking me when I was down, so to speak.
I just personally think, well, and I think this also reflects a lot of people's opinion, that the comments that he gave, that you quoted, were pathetic, and I'm also in favor of going ahead with your suggestion of like putting some sort of policy in place that would penalize similar future actions like that.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you. Vicky, does that about cover your point?
Okay. Fourth was against my complaint against Javier. Javier conducted an interview with the link that was going to be released during the campaign period, or the polling period, which I had told everybody they couldn't do. He was unaware, and he showed me like a really long list of emails and Facebook messages and text messages where he had tried to retract his comments. It happened at the same time that a member of the opposite committee had done done the same thing. And so I felt that the two sort of canceled each other out, and I didn't really feel it was necessary to penalize either party further because they were both had essentially the same messages were out. Lastly, the vote no committee was pretty upset with the vote yes committee because there was a pretty strong presence of members of the vote yes committee being around and using cameras to sort of, they were trying to keep track or keep them accountable, but it got to the point where it was borderline harassment. And at that point, the vote yes committee had seen a fair amount of harassment from the student public. People were pointing at them on the stairs and laughing at them, calling them crazy. There was prejudicial messages that were on bathrooms. There was some things that were done on social media by members of the Concordia student public that I felt were pretty unfair and pretty terrible. And this was sort of their only way that they could actually try and mitigate some of that. I just went to the vote no committee or vote yes committee and I said you should probably stop just like constantly hanging around them and filming them. If you see something that's a clear breach of violations, then by all means you should try and collect evidence, because without evidence I can't do anything. But just sort of to calm down, and they obliged. So that was okay. So complaints against the vote yes committee. Did you guys all receive the like long comprehensive document that was sent to me by the vote no committee about the vote yes committee in council docs?
No.
No? Okay, I'll send that to you guys as well. It was about an 18-page report that outlines their complaints against, the vote yes complaints against the vote no committee. Some of them had merit. The big challenge with a lot of them was evidence. I mean, there's so many things that went on that maybe did happen, but without, again, quantifiable evidence, I don't think it's fair for me to just jump to the conclusion that one side is right over the other and immediately act. So unless there was clear black and white proof that something had gone on, I didn't act on it. And this is, I think, again, why some of the people were frustrated with me and they felt that I wasn't doing my job. But I really feel that it's important, especially in a situation as sensitive as this, and in my position, to only act when it's really for sure going on. So the biggest concern that I had with the no campaign was that there was allegations that people were going around essentially spreading falsified information about what the ramifications of BDS would be if it came to Concordia. Some of those points included that Israeli students would no longer be allowed on campus, kosher food would no longer be served on campus, Israeli exchange students would not be allowed to attend Concordia, things like this. 2 students sent me emails and 1 student met with me one-on-one to discuss their interactions with people that had told them this. In order to sort of do my own due diligence, I actually went to the classroom of 2 of the complainers the following week at the same time, and I sort of just did a quick survey of students going in and asked them what they had heard the week before, and sure enough, they corroborated with what the complaints had said, which is that they were told kosher food wouldn't be allowed, Israeli students wouldn't be allowed, and so on. And this was essentially the biggest concern that I had with the entire campaign, because I felt that if this was widespread enough, it would have a severe influence on people that maybe aren't as knowledgeable as everybody in this room is on the situation, on how they would vote. I mean, I know personally if somebody came up to me and I hadn't done any research and told me that kosher food would no longer be allowed on campus if this was passed on, I would probably not vote that way. So I was really concerned with this. I thought it could have an actual impact on the election and how people voted. And so it was one of the issues that I discussed with the lawyer. Point B was one of a couple different, not exclusively from Concordia students, but Michael Zajdil was somebody that was engaged in the campaign. And he had done a few crude statements prior to this, both in person and online. And I mean, what he wrote was pretty terrible. I don't know if you guys read it or not.
Could you repeat that name for?
Michael Zajdal. I had interactions with him, and he was always very unreceptive to any commentary that I offered. He essentially told me that I couldn't, he had the right to free speech, and he could say whatever he wanted, in spite of the fact that it was hateful. There was other students that I had similar issues with, and non-students that I had confrontations with, that were sort of saying similar things. And it was really sad to see. And because he was part of a campaign, I could actually hold him accountable. And so that was another thing that contributed to me not reimbursing any of the no committee for their expenses. Zach Ross made a similar statement, but it was not nearly as extreme, in which it was just sort of falsified information was released to the public over Facebook, where he called people hate-filled students and so on. It was very minute compared to what Michael had said, but nonetheless it was worth bringing up, and it also played into sort of the fact that it was more than one person that was releasing these sorts of statements made it more justifiable to punish the entire committee. Campaigning during the polling period. The photograph that is included in the report is just it's something that I discuss every time during the pre-election meeting, which says don't write things on boards saying vote, and somebody did. This is actually an interesting case study, because this is a sort of piece of information that normally if I had only received once, I couldn't really do anything about, because there's no date on it. There's no way of knowing that it was going on during the campaign period. But 5 different people came up and said to me that they had seen it, and I had different pictures of it. And so when it was this overwhelming amount of information, I felt that it was pretty justifiable to sort of make a leap of faith and say that yes, this is in fact going on. The decision I decided to come to was to fine them $150, which is the full amount that I can fine them, and essentially the limit of what I think I can punish people for. So those are the main complaints. I've already sort of discussed notes about complaints against the noted BDS committee, which is a whole bunch of different examples of allegations that were made about them, but that were unverifiable in my opinion. And again, I really do think that unless I can see black and white that something was done wrong, and that includes me personally trying to investigate it, which is my job, and I truly did do to like the full extent that I could. I'm not going to just take a leap of faith and say since one thing happened it must have been them and punish them, because I don't think that's fair. At this point I'll comment sort of on the lawyer. There was a lot of, unless anybody has any questions about anything I just said. Okay, so all of these issues and other issues like false allegations that were going on, and the possibility, I had been told that if this would go through, that there was a high likelihood that the CSU could be sued by a lobby group for promoting prejudice and for allowing a prejudicial question to go to democratic vote. And I thought, given the overwhelming amount of complaints that had happened, problems that had gone on, and the degree to which people were already criticizing me and criticizing the union for doing things by going to the judicial board or wherever, I thought the way I could lend the most merit to my decision making was to discuss the issues that I had already dealt with a lawyer. So asking a lawyer essentially to go over the decisions that I had made, the decisions the judicial board had made, and ensure that we were acting within our own rules and regulations and bylaws and all of the conduct that we had done to that point. In doing so, I think it really did succeed in making people believe that we had truly done our best and not acted totally out of line in the entire electoral process. We discussed things like what could be done in these extreme situations to hold people accountable, and essentially the lawyer agreed with me that really you can't dock votes. Docking votes is the least democratic thing you can do, and ultimately you just have to trust that the people that were giving this falsified information have good enough judgment to realize that the idea that not allowing Israeli students to come to Concordia is against Canadian law. And we decided to count the votes. And so we did. I don't regret going to see the lawyer at all. It was an incredibly productive meeting. And it really did lend a lot of merit to the decision making that I had done and the process that we had followed up to that point. Without it, I think there's a much higher likelihood that we would have had a lot of appeals to the judicial board or actual legal ramifications beyond this Brith Benai hate crimes allegation. So I really think that was a good decision.
Just to make something real clear, so now there's no more any like potential lawsuit? It's all over?
I have no idea. Maybe.
Okay, but to your knowledge, everything is...
No, I don't think
okay.
so. There still is an ongoing hate crimes investigation with Brith Benai.
Okay.
Apparently. But I don't really get the details about that.
Okay.
Fortunately.
Michael?
Thank you. Back to point B in your negatives. I talked about ITS and network services.
Oh, okay. I was about to get there. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No,
Go
fine.
ahead then.
Okay. ITS and network services. This is a disaster every day one of the election I've ever worked. Inevitably, the IP addresses don't... Okay, so downtown Loyola, there's two different services that are set up. At Loyola, it's a wireless internet connection, so it's less secure, to the database that we use to check students' information and the fact that we can check them off if they voted once, so they can't vote twice. It's a very important system. Without it, we would have to have long sheets of every single undergraduate student and what faculty they're in, which is how things used to work. The problem with this is that ITS and network services never seem to be on entirely the same page. And actually at this point, I had sent a work order in 3 weeks prior to the elections, and one entire part of it, the network services part, was not done at all. And this may seem like it would hopefully be an isolated incident, but in every single election I've run, invariably I spend the first 6 hours running around trying to find 2 people to fix the problems that were going on, and then having to do provisional voting. It's incredibly stressful, and this year was no exception. This year when we started, ballots opened at 10 o'clock on Tuesday. Not a single network was hooked up when I had placed an order in 3 weeks prior for them all to be set up. So only provisional voting went on for the first 3 hours, and for nearly the entire first day, the John Molson building did not have access to the network. I think they only got it by about 5 p.m. So it's a disaster, and it's a chronic disaster, and I really don't know how to solve the problem, because ultimately it's not really something that I can deal with once I send a work order, other than calling and reminding them every couple of days or emailing them to remind them. But it's a disaster every time.
Thank you. On that point, when I went to go vote, I voted the first day at JMSB, and I found it kind of odd that it was like all of our ballots were kind of just placed in a pile, and we just had to write our name on like a sketchy sheet of paper. I just want to know what controls did you put in place, and what would you recommend moving forward that can kind of avoid having to write things on literally a piece of Hilroy scratch paper?
Ultimately, the Hilroy scratch paper isn't actually what's used to check the votes.
Okay.
What we do to check the votes is you use the provisional vote system, which is essentially you have one envelope that is completely unlabeled. You'll place your ballots in it, it's sealed, and you place that envelope into a secondary envelope which has your name and your student identification number on it. So what we do is Zach Brayman and I, because it's supposed to be the chair of the judicial board and the CEO that go through the provisional votes, then take all of these envelopes and check them off one by one with the database. So we actually do check with the same database that everybody else goes through to ensure that people haven't voted twice. We read the first name, and it'll say Michael Richardson, student number, whatever. We type it in as if you were voting at that same time at a different station.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, it'll say this person has voted or this person hasn't. Hopefully you hadn't. I don't think you had. I remember checking it off. And then you check it off, you remove the first envelope, and you leave the secondary envelope, which is completely unlabeled with anybody's name, into a pile. You keep doing this until all of the provisional votes have been processed, and then you have a huge pile of unmarked envelopes with ballots inside.
Mm-hmm.
This ensures that everybody's vote is still anonymous, and it also allows for everybody to be checked and make sure that they didn't vote twice.
Fair enough.
So the system does work, but it's very time consuming, it's very stressful to deal with in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And like it happens every time, every single time.
Thank you.
But the system does work to fix it. It's just really frustrating.
Would it be possible to speak with the network service and the IITS to make sure that this does not happen for the subsequent elections?
I've talked to them every time it's happened. And it's still happened every single time. Actually, this time it was the worst by far because they didn't set up anything. And the reason for the confusion this time, they said, was because they received 2 work orders because we had the elections concurrently with ASFA. And they assumed that then they had filled out everything for ASFA that was for both. Obviously, we know isn't true. And that's where they said the problem came from. But ultimately, it's human error that's causing this. There's no systemic problem. It's just people either being busy or being negligent that causes the issues. Okay. So positives. I was blown away by how many people voted. The year before, like the election before I started working, the last 2 hours of the last day of polling for by-elections, they hired people to go walk around the halls to go make people go reach quorum, which is 450 people, which is crazy. And then this year we had 2,500 voters. So obviously I don't think this is attributable to me. I think it's attributable to the question, entirely the BDS question, but still it's amazing that so many more people are engaged with student politics than were 3 years ago. That's pretty great. Staff did pretty well. The only issues we had, and were certainly serious issues, were oftentimes, especially with the secondary ballot that we had to make for the BDS question, which was just printed on basic white paper, people got 2 ballots. I got 3 complaints about it, and I'm sure it happened more than that. But again, it's human error. It's something that I warned everybody about, and I'm always very careful with. Be sure that you count the ballots before you give them out, and that you give the correct ballots to people. But especially because it wasn't on cardstock, it was on that thin paper, it was a situation that happened, and it was a problem. It's not something that I'm particularly happy about, but I don't really know beyond standing and always being watching of what they're doing, what you can do. It's human error. I mean, other than a few people actually behaved incredibly well as candidates, the yes committee and the no committee included. Like, I was blown away by how diplomatic they were in spite of having completely conflicting views. Unfortunately, a few people really shifted the public perception of how their conduct was just by their actions, because inevitably people are more interested in bad news than good news. But really, the heavy majority of people behaved so well. It was pretty great. More negatives. The amount of complaints and emails I got was like insane. Like 100 a day from like students, and it was just nuts. And largely they were completely unfounded, but I still had to read them and respond to them. It was completely insanity. And people from Israel, like, it was nuts. I think I wrote earlier, I got a video from a university in Tel Aviv where somebody had gone around and done like a survey of students and essentially like filmed a whole bunch of students talking about how much they disagreed with what Concordia was doing and emailed it to me. It's pretty crazy. Other negatives. The database. The database, I don't know why, but there's 2 problems that sometimes come up. The one is where a student will come up and they'll have 2 profiles. So they'll say they're a student twice, the same person listed twice. And if they're listed twice, I can't let them vote because there's no way to verify that they haven't already voted. And so it happened a couple of different times, and there's literally nothing I can do about it. Those people just can't vote, and it's really unfortunate. It happens not regularly, maybe 1 out of every 1,000 people it'll happen, and it's really unfortunate. There's also always a discrepancy between like the amount of people that they say have voted in the database versus the amount of ballots that they actually have. And I think partially that's due to just human error in counting. And a lot of it's just people that have torn up ballots, or that didn't, people will come and they'll only take 2 ballots. Especially with the BDS question, people will come up and they'll be handed all of the ballots, and then they'll just put all the rest of the ballots down, take the BDS question and just fill it out and put it in. But even still, if you look at the amount of votes that we had in the most important question, which was BDS, and compared it to with how many the database said voted, it still doesn't add up perfectly, which I think is concerning, and I really don't know why that is. There's no way, there's no lost ballots, there's no lost ballot boxes, there's no weird underground creepy business going on in the ballot counting room. Like, a lot of different people here have seen it go on. It's pretty boring. But it's a problem, and I really don't know how to solve it.
On that point, Andre, do you know what the variance was in terms of how many people voted according to the database and how many ballots you had? Like, was it
it's
significant
probably
enough?
within the BDS question, I think it was about 50.
50, okay.
And so, and with the BDS question, we were very diligent. Like, we went insanely slow to be super careful of every single thing because it was close. And as soon as it's close, you tend to take more care. With other questions, like for councillors, if it's close, you be really careful, but oftentimes the discrepancies become very large.
Mm-hmm.
But
okay,
there's got to be, people get given all the ballots and just refuse to take them, essentially, and that's why you see such a huge variance between different referendum questions, because some people just only really want to vote for one thing and they're not even willing to touch the other buckets. Okay, recommendations. So the first one is a harassment policy. I don't think people should be allowed to harass myself or my staff, and people should be held accountable for that. And right now there's nothing in the elections chapter that really alludes to that, and I can only punish people based on infractions in the actual elections chapter of the rules and regulations. So something's got to be done about that. Ballot counting. I think I said this last time too. I understand that people are really excited and they really want to find out what happened the next day, but I mean, on that day, like, I work 21 hours. I start at like 7 o'clock in the morning and I end up working until 4. And some of my staff will start at 2 and end at 4. And it's to wait another 24 hours to have everything counted, I don't think is that crazy. And you can, I guarantee you there'll be less human error, which will drop the variance between the database and the actual counts, and you'll just have a happier staff. And I think it's pretty important. It would be nice. I've been pretty clear throughout my entire time doing this job that I am not very good at social media or promoting things or marketing. Actually, I think I'm really bad at it. Hopefully the next person that you hire will be better, but I really think because there's so many different things going on, especially during the campaign period and during the polling, that it's impossible for just the CEO to be responsible for promoting the election and mitigating conflicts. So I think it'd be really great to hire a DEO specifically for the purpose of promoting the election. Yep.
How much bigger do you think that would inflate the budget? Or how much would you think that would inflate the budget for elections?
I mean, no more than maybe $800.
Okay.
Because it'd just be staff wages. And like largely, I mean, printing is not a very big cost. And that'd be largely social media, which is free, and posters. Because those are really the two best outreach methodologies that we have, at least so far at our disposal. Receiving information from council in a timely manner. This year, like I said earlier, I had to do the first 2 weeks of work without any staff because the day before I had to announce the polls, people resigned from council, and so that's when they decided to have a by-election. And it's really, really hard and stressful to be able to do something in such a tight amount of time.
Just repeat that last point.
Receiving information from council in a timely manner. Essentially, the problem was related to people resigning at the last minute. I don't see really how you can change that, people resigning and calling an election, but it's just incredibly stressful to be able to do so many things in such a short period of time when you don't have any support staff. The idea of election committee, I thought should be established to work on rules and regulations specifically, and I guess it could be extended to policy committee, but there's problems with the rules and regulations and it really needs to be addressed. I've already told Terry that I'd be really happy to participate in looking at the rules and seeing what we can do to improve, especially with regards to referendum committees, but it's something that really needs to be dealt with. Yes, Vicky.
Okay, for the election committee, would it be a permanent council committee, first of all? Second of all, would you recommend having basically councillors and kind of like executive on it that would that would not run the following year in order to avoid influencing the rules and basically regulations to their favor?
I think it wouldn't be a permanent committee. Like, it would be. It would be like sort of just to address what's going on right now. I don't think you would need to be meeting every month to be able to constantly review what you have done, because the elections only happen twice a year. Really, if you prepare for the first one and then you make some changes and prepare for the second one, that's adequate. Maybe the next year, if you feel like you need to do another review, you can establish a short-term committee, but I don't think it needs to be permanent. I also don't think it would really need to be limited necessarily to people that are ensuring that they're not going to vote or not going to run the next year. Because if it's a Democratic council, theoretically, it's not going to be, they're not going to be able to push through things that are going to benefit just themselves. And it would also be incredibly hard to do so in the first place. So I think that'd be okay. Harry?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that after reading this, I had spoken with Andre and I had suggested the idea of just specifically for the purposes of reviewing the referendum book and process, to just expand the policy committee to anybody who's interested in potentially taking part in what would have been an election committee. So, and Andre seemed very open to that idea.
Seems fine to me.
Yeah.
Totally. It's just dealing with the rules and regulations is all that really needs to happen. Any other questions? Great. Campaign period end date. This is particularly with reference to referendum committees, but I don't understand why everything has to close so sharply prior to the polling. I understand issues related to people campaigning directly next to polling stations. That's something that's obviously gonna influence people pretty drastically if they're literally in the process of voting and somebody is saying vote for me. But the idea of still having a social media presence, still having a media presence in the newspapers, I really don't think would have too negative of an influence on the elections. I think it would overwhelmingly be good. It would attract more people to vote, make people more educated. Yep.
Would you also allow candidates to basically campaign online during the polling period? Or basically it would be limited only to referendum committees?
I think it'd be something that would have to be discussed with policy committee. My personal opinion is I don't think it would be very detrimental. I think it's how federal and provincial politics are already going on now. But I do understand that there is a flip side to that, and it's something that should be discussed.
What is that flip side?
Ask Terry.
Okay. I just feel like the idea of having the ability to campaign like through static media, like things like the student newspaper and things like that, seems appropriate, especially for referendum questions. However, like given like the increasing perversion of like electronic communications into like our day-to-day lives, there's very little distinction between campaigning online and campaigning in person. It's given that you're not allowed to be by a polling station already, right? Like that's already a rule in place.
The example you used that I thought made a lot of sense is somebody could just be looking at their phone while they're in line for a polling station and see a Facebook update that says vote for me. And really, what's the differentiation between that and somebody standing in front of you and say just vote for me? I think that does hold some merit. It's worth discussing. Other information, that's how many people voted. It's the little table, 2,582 according to the database, which is, I think, really impressive. And then I've attached a few articles, not nearly all of the articles that were written about the BDS campaign at Concordia, from the Montreal Gazette, the Canadian Jewish News, Times of Israel, the Palestinian News Network, the Jewish Tribune, Center for Israel and Jewish Affairs, so on and so forth. So if you want, you can click on those links and check them out.
Marcus? Yeah, I don't have my computer in front of me, but I didn't actually see the CBC radio mention or link.
There's no article. It was just
it's
discussed
okay.
over the radio.
Yeah,
I was actually told about it by my supervisor.
That's fair. Okay.
Any other questions? Yep.
In terms of media coverage, was kind of like this the most covered election externally since the 2003 general election after the Netanyahu riots?
I can only really comment on since I've been working, and I've never gotten a phone call from anybody other than the link of the Concordia. And I got a lot more phone calls this time, so yes.
So there was James.
I have a question. I just wanted to thank you once again for a very detailed report and holding some very well done, well executed, and professional elections. We've been doing this for a couple of years now, and they're always very well done. I hear from the average students that aren't involved that it's clear and easy and better than it used to be. So I think you're doing a great job, and we're all in your debt for that one. Thanks.
Thank you. That was my point.
Great. Okay, I'm done. Oh, I actually have one more thing to say. I'm quitting. But I'm still here as a graduate student, and I know it's a difficult transition for somebody to make just immediately come into the job. So I've already told the executives I'm happy to take part in assisting with the hiring process and assisting with training and being available in case there's any like emergencies during the actual elections. I'm more than willing to help out. I want to make sure that whoever fills in my role can do a good job because it's really important and doesn't get thrown into the fire, so to speak.
Got Ben and then Michael.
Yeah, I just wanted to say on our end, like the elections could have disrupted, I think, the CSU quite a bit. But Andre, the way you handled it was, I think, contained it to yourself and myself. So we contained it, but mostly it was you. Definitely, it was mostly contained, but to your job. So I just wanted to thank you for that too. I'll leave it at that. But yeah, thanks. I was pretty worried.
Me too.
Okay, Michael.
Just for our discussions later, how much was your compensation last year for by-elections and then for general elections?
For general elections, I believe I was paid about $6,300, and for the by-elections, I think I was paid about $3,000, $3,200 maybe.
Okay, thank you.
And this was by far the most work I've ever done in an election. By far. Like, the amount of hours that I worked was, like, really ridiculous.
Would you compare it to a general election?
More, by far.
Okay.
Truly. Like, it was pretty overwhelming.
According to your best estimate, how many hours did you put in for this by-election? Approximately.
I actually compiled a sheet with somebody the other day, and to be entirely frank, I don't know what I've done with it. And I think Heather has it.
Yeah, we have that.
You have it, but yeah, it was a lot. The preparation took a lot more time than it has in the past because I didn't have any support. It was just me, so like most of all the postering that went on, like was mostly just me that did it. I had one guy that helped out on like an interim basis. And then just sheerly dealing with emails and dealing with phone calls, dealing with people in my office. Like I had people that would come into my office and talk to me for 2 hours about their concerns, like literally. It was pretty overwhelming. And then a lot of the follow-up work that I had to do, like seeing a lawyer, it just took a lot of time.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation and your hard work and putting up with pretty exceptional circumstances. I don't think a wet noodle would have been up for it.
Thanks everybody. I got really good support from the executives. They never overstepped their bounds and tried to become involved where they shouldn't have, but they were pleasant and helpful. And the majority of council, all of council, was always pretty nice. So I'm very grateful to work for nice people.
Yeah.
Okay, Michael, then Ben.
Motion to recess for pizza.
Thank you. Okay, there's a motion to take a recess. Seconded by Vicky. Does anyone oppose?
For 5 minutes.
Whoa.
We'll take a 15-minute recess and reconvene at 8:10.
Oh.
Those in favor of going into closed session, please raise your placards. Those opposed? Abstentions?
Noted.
Okay, closed session is now in effect. That moves us to appointments. The first of which being the appointments to the Senate. I guess, Gabe, the floor is yours.
Yeah. So I don't know if it was last week or the week before. I think it was last week. The Appointments Committee met to discuss the appointment to Senate. There was one senator that dropped, and so we opened up the process and went through all the procedures, whatever, and interviewed the candidates. And as you can see in the minutes of the Appointments Committee, we decided to appoint, to recommend the appointment of Aloise. I guess, James, you pulled out the minutes of the Appointments Committee, so I feel like it's appropriate to talk about here, because that's probably the only thing we talk about at the Appointments Committee. So the one issue, I guess, that people saw was that the fact that there was only one candidate that was interviewed for the position. I know something that was discussed at length at Appointments Committee. And we came up with the decision that to go ahead and interview the one candidate, because we did follow the procedure to get, there seemed to be a lack of interest in the student population. And if the candidate was qualified enough, we would appoint, and if they weren't, we'd reopen up the process. And this was based on several factors, one of the major ones being that there's very few Senate meetings left by the end of the year, and opening it up again would just further delay us having a full Senate as students representing. So that's the process that we went through, and the candidate was deemed qualified. So we are making the recommendation now to appoint him. That's it.
Very much. So we can open up discussion then before we go to a vote. Yeah, James?
I actually pulled it because I was curious about the CEO position that was in the minutes but wasn't there. And I was wondering if Andre had already resigned and we had done it and you didn't get, did you get any applicants, or it wasn't put out yet because he hadn't resigned?
Yeah, with regards to CEO position, we've opened up the application process. We've sent it out to the newsletter. We've gotten a whole bunch of applicants. We're meeting.
They just haven't been interviewed yet through appointment?
No, we haven't interviewed
Okay,
yet. We were just deciding the questions. Yeah.
That's what I was asking. They were kind of off topic.
Yeah.
Second question, if I may. The website was down for a little bit, and like during the transition period, I was just curious how the Senate appointments process went through, because I know usually we post it on the website and get word out through there. What happened? Was it put on that website? Like, could we put on that website?
There is a function to put on the website, but the appointments to Senate was before the website thing that happened, so it didn't affect it.
Was still on the old one.
Yeah, it was just I guess like during finals that students are busy, and yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, so just a reminder, we're on a speakers list for ratifying the recommendations of the Appointments Committee. Are there any questions, any points? Okay, well if not, we can proceed to a vote then. So the vote is, do we have the name of the candidate?
It's in the Appointments Committee minutes. I'm just going to say Aloise, and then I'll just write it down and bring it for the minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
The exact spelling.
The exact spelling. Just gonna bring it.
Yeah,
Because
okay.
I understand Aloise.
Okay, so then the motion is to appoint this Aloise to Senate as per the recommendations of the Appointments Committee. So those in favor, please raise your placards. Those opposed? Any abstentions? 1, 2, oh, 2, 3. Okay, that carries. Thank you very much. So next on appointments is the Library Services Fund Committee.
Yes, there's, upon the resignation of Vicky to the Library Service Fund Committee, there is now an empty seat on that committee, and if anyone on council wishes to sit on that committee, there's a spot available. So if you want more details as to what the committee is about and what they do, maybe Charles, you can elaborate.
I'm just pulling up the remainder of the meetings, what the dates are. They are in my email somewhere. Okay, anyway, I guess I'll just briefly talk about what the committee does. We meet maybe 4 or 5 times a year to discuss what to use the funds in the Library Service Fund agreement. There's a $1.50 fee levy that's collected each year per credit from students that is put into this fund. This is going to expire, or this fund and fee levy collection is going to expire in about 5 or 4 years from now. And the committee meetings are just there to essentially facilitate what this money is going to be used for. So recently the money's been used for the launch of the Vanier Library Course Reserve Room, which is 24 hours. And we're working on other projects like a green wall for the Webster Library when the renovations are complete. So it's essentially just a committee formed with the library admin to oversee the funds and what they're used for. So it's pretty relaxed. Like I said, meetings are 4 to 5 times a year. We need one more student representative. So if anyone is interested here, we can I can like get what the dates are for the rest of the meetings, and we'll just go from there. So I'll pull up the dates for the meetings right now. Yep. Okay, well, Cassandra just said she might be interested, and according to the contract between the CSU and I guess the library administration, it can be any undergraduate student appointed by CSU. So if, yeah.
I'm going to move to appoint Cassandra to the Library Services Fund Committee, and if I may motivate.
Yes, well, is there a seconder before motivation? Seconded Chloe, go ahead.
Or do you want to wait for other nominees perhaps, or can I go right ahead?
Well, right now we're taking nominees, so that's fine.
Yeah.
If there
Okay,
are
I'm now going to motivate only because Cassandra works at the CSU as their archivist, and archiving libraries go very well together. She has shown a incredible passion for information management in a way that most people don't have that ability. So I think she'd be really good at this and offer an interesting perspective as to how student money can actually help the like research and academic side of the library, and less like buying plants and couches side of the library. Not saying that's all we do, but it'd be great. And she's super keen.
Thank you very much. Charles?
Just one more thing, the committee is meeting one more time on Thursday, March 12th, 2015.
Thank you. Okay, if there's no further discussion, are there any other nominations for the Library Services Fund Committee? If there are no further nominations, then we can proceed to the vote for Cassandra. So all those in favor of appointing Cassandra to the Library Services Fund Committee? Okay, those opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, that carries. Seems like you picked a good meeting to be taking minutes at. So, sorry, I'm just going to return back to the agenda. The third point on appointments is student life. Okay, you want to go ahead?
So similar situation as Library Service Fund Committee, and I guess we could do a double whammy instead of for less time. We could do Student Life and Loyola. There's just 2 seats available on either committee, one on Student Life and one on Loyola for counselors. So if anyone is interested in those 2 positions.
Okay, Malin and James.
I'd like to do Student Life if possible. Nominate myself, I guess.
Okay, is there a seconder for Malin? James? Would you like to motivate?
I was actually appointed to it last year, and I never went to any of the meetings because they didn't actually add me to the mailing list, and I like asked incessantly to be put on the mailing list. And anyways, so I would like to actually be part of this committee this year. And I am extremely involved in student life, for those of you who know me, and I think I can add a lot of value for that. But yeah.
Thank you very much. Who seconded? That was seconded by James. So we can now entertain a speakers list regarding the nomination of Malin. Okay, that's fine. Now, are there any other people interested in the appointment for student life? Does anyone care to nominate somebody or themselves? Okay, if not, we can proceed to the vote for Malin for the Student Life Committee. Those in favor of appointing Malin to the Student Life Committee, please use your placards. Those opposed? And any abstentions? 1, okay, 2. Okay, great, that passes. Congratulations, Malin. Yeah,
I just had a question. The open position on Loyola and this one, are they because of Paul's resignation? Oh, okay. Did Paul sit on any committees? Perfect. Thank you.
Great, so that brings us to the 4th appointment, which is Loyola. Does anyone have any questions about the Loyola committee? Would anyone care to appoint anyone or nominate anyone rather themselves? There is no obligation whatsoever. If not, that'll be deferred to another meeting.
You have enough council. You have enough members for quorum.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's fine. That can just be sent back to the appointments committee. Okay, very good. So that does it for appointments then. Which brings us to returning business, the informational point on the greenhouse. And Jessica, this is your point.
Yeah. So I sent out a little one-pager with a brief update. I was just really excited. There's going to be another bigger document with a lot of information coming up probably next council meeting, hopefully with a presentation and everything. But I just wanted to share the possible sustainable greenhouse system strategies that we could incorporate in this greenhouse, and 3 different greenhouses that we've been looking at. So in terms of the greenhouses, I think at first we were going to look at 2 different options on the roof, and then one on the side of the building. But now, after speaking with the architects and the designers, the 3 different options that we are moving forward with, well, not moving forward, but started looking into, was on top of the building, but going around the appliances, the air units that are currently there. The second option was still the one that would be 3 stories high beside the SC building. And then the last option is one that would be in ground. And then the location could be more flexible in terms of where we install it. So those are the 3 greenhouses that we've been looking into. And each of them are the same size, so they're 360 meters square of cultivation area. So yeah, so I didn't know if anybody had questions. Everything, I think a lot of the details and more specifics will be coming out when we present, so hopefully the next council meeting. But yeah, I just wanted to share it with everybody. So that's it. Okay.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for that. So if there is no questions or comments.
Actually, I'd like to something else.
Yeah, please do.
In terms of the sustainability strategies, some of them are really interesting, and I think it's important to look at this greenhouse in terms of the long one and what we want to, what we want to develop inside the greenhouse, and to make sure that in a few years it's still cutting edge and new technology. And because of the SC building already is at a maximum capacity, it's really important for the greenhouse to be kind of autonomous. It can't, as it stands, use the energy of the SC building because it's already at capacity. That's kind of what happened also with the construction of the Hive a few years ago. We had to make sure that this happened. A lot of money was put into it. So yeah, that's all I wanted to, I guess, add, was that these technologies are really important. And in the context that we're given with the building, it gives us it twists our arm just a little bit to, pursue these options even more. So yeah, that's why I also shared it in the document.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Is that it for your points?
That's it.
Great. All right, so that brings us to new business informational. Starting with the Cooperative Student Housing Project update. Terry, I believe this is your point?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
All right, great. Hello, everybody. I'm very excited to provide an update on the Cooperative Student Housing Project the CSU is embarking on. Just a quick overview. In September, the CSU commissioned an external organization called UTSIL to provide a feasibility study for us looking into the viability of the CSU to begin producing cooperative housing for students, affordable housing. The study took several weeks to complete. In November, they came to council, made a presentation. I know some of you were here, but obviously the new councilors this took place prior to the elections, so they weren't there. But at this presentation, they went over the, outcomes of the feasibility study, and specifically reviewing the development models and the funding models that the CSU could choose to go ahead with. In terms of development, there's the classical conversion of residential units or commercial infrastructure to convert it into affordable housing for students, and obviously the alternative is to have new construction. There are obviously positives and negatives to each scenario. However, I feel that it was pretty well explained in the document, given like the complexity behind students embarking on such a project, seeing as it is like a groundbreaking initiative. I described it in the mid-mandate report as our most ambitious one, because it has the ability to influence the discourse at a municipal level around student housing. Montreal is a student city. We have 400,000 students, and unfortunately there's no municipal level policy on student housing. There's a complete inadequate supply of housing for students provided through universities. Like, for example, there's less than 1,000 housing units provided through residences at Concordia, and therefore we're faced with a lot of students being exposed to like the predatory tenant market, or like the speculative market that unfortunately through like many research studies that have been done internally by the CSU's HOJO, like the Off-Campus Housing and Job Bank, and externally. Recently there was just an investigative report done by the Journal de Montréal talking about how international and out-of-province students are continuously paying a lot more for their rent and paying like illegal deposits, being asked for personal information, personal financial information, among a host of other problematics. So I think it was important for us to have the opportunity to review this document. And additionally, there are the financial models that were outlined. One is where the CSU would be providing equity for the development of a cooperative housing unit. So just simply put, we would be providing like hard money to a single project. And I guess the wiggle room that would be provided through this option is one where we would have like different payback schedules. Like we could determine what the payback schedules would be. However, that would put more pressure on the more like traditional loans that we would have to procure from the down payment that we'd be putting in through the equity. The second funding option was the loan option. So it's very similar to the equity option, but instead of providing hard money, you're providing a loan. So in the end, the CSU would be receiving that money back. And what that allows us to do is create a situation where there would be like a first rank loan and a second rank loan. So the CSU would be the second rank loan in the like quasi-equity scenario. And the third scenario was the creation of an investment fund dedicated to providing affordable housing for students. This scenario was the one outlining like the capacity to expand the ability for us to produce more affordable housing units for students. And this, I guess it's a lot more innovative given like the traditional development scenarios and funding scenarios provided for like standard real estate projects. So following that presentation that we had, there was a referendum question, and luckily we had the report from Andre, so like in the documents everyone saw what the referendum question was, and it was talking about continuing to prioritize efforts being made to address student housing conditions and actively support student cooperative housing. And surprisingly, I was really surprised. I wasn't surprised by me being surprised, but surprisingly, we received the highest amount of support from the student body. I crunched the numbers, and it received 89.8% support from students. And I think, yeah, you can't underscore like how overwhelming that was. It gave me like the confidence to go and speak to external organizations that could act as institutional investors, given like the I guess just the substantial amount of recognition, I guess, that students had of housing being a problem that they're facing. I mean, when you're looking at incomes, like housing is typically the chunk that eats up a lot of your income. So like your disposable income is like a function of how much you pay for rent usually. So this is really about like increasing the living standards for students while they're at Concordia. So following following the election in January, I was able to meet with Ben. We met with the CEO of the Chantier Économie Sociale. I'm not going to say that word again. I'm going to refer to them as CES from now on. So we met with the CEO of CES, and they run a trust. And this trust last year alone invested $13 million in social economy enterprises, and they're funded by the federal government. However, they're completely independent. And we were discussing the outcomes of the election, the direction we would like to take this project moving ahead, and Nancy Neatman will be coming to our next council meeting to make a presentation to talk about the collaboration that we would like to embark on, essentially. And at the moment, what we're doing is we're determining like the scope and the scale of this partnership with the CES. And the reason for that is because in the constitution of the Chantier, it's an easy way to call them, in the constitution of this Chantier, it explicitly states that they cannot transfer finances into another fund. So if we're looking to continue exploring and moving ahead with the third option, there should be some parameters set on how much they would be collaborating with us and on what scale and what the scope would be. So we're kind of like fine-tuning those things at the moment. Simultaneously, the Chantier is validating the model that was presented to us for the third funding option. So what that means is just going through like the financial pro forma. So it's reviewing like the building costs, the first year operating costs, and the costs throughout the throughout the payment schedule of reimbursing like the loan or the equity or the quasi-equity, whatever we decide, whatever method we decide to go ahead with. So I feel like after they've validated the model, we'll be able to get like some concrete discussions going on about what the collaboration would look like specifically, and that will be taking place prior to the next council meeting. So ideally, Nancy would be speaking about the potential partnership we could have with the CES. And the reason why we felt, myself and Ben, that it was appropriate to approach the Chantier is because they have an explicit mandate to promote and support like new projects, specifically new like social enterprise projects. So we figured that given that they're mandated to support new projects and that they're focused on capacity building, like they really emphasize the importance of like continuous support and self-appropriating support. So like giving the agency for folks to continue moving ahead in a long-term sense instead of just looking like short-term at individual projects. They like to support like broader, longer-term initiatives. And that's why like we were so excited to hear that from them, and that's why we feel that the third funding scenario is the one that's most appropriate given like the systemic and systematic abuses, I guess, that students are being subjected to in like the traditional tenant market. So I just wanted to provide an update on that and inform everyone that Nancy will be coming to council and will be like discussing more thoroughly what the collaboration and partnership will be looking like. I hope I didn't rant for too long, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah, Vicky, go ahead.
I know that the issue of economic student housing touches students of all levels. Have you spoken with the graduate student association to make some kind of a partnership on that issue?
Yeah. Okay. So I guess the financial situation at the Graduate Student Association is not very similar to the one at the CSU, where we have like the Silk Fund. They don't have a fund that was dedicated to like benefit and improve student space. Like they don't have a fund that was mandated to do that. But yeah, I would definitely consider approaching the GSA once the details on our collaboration is more clear.
That was really concise, and I wanted to say thank you that they're always clear to the point, concise, and you get all the information out there for council. So I always enjoy your updates, and I think it's important that we're all abreast of what's going on there. I'm also going to provide my regrets. I gotta go. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. If there are no further points of discussion on this, then we can move to point 8B, which is the mid-mandate report. So thank you very much for everyone in the executive for submitting your mid-mandate reports. It was a thorough job by everybody. I don't know who wants to start off by addressing this point, so I'll leave it to someone on the exec. Yeah, Ben.
There's not much to say. I think everything's been said in the report itself. Essentially, our audience for this report was you and future execs. So that's kind of who we were writing for. So yeah, that's all I have to say. And then the report's very long, so feel free to ask questions.
All right, very good. So if there's no further questions or comments about the reports, and thank you again for those, we can move on to point 8C, which is point external relations. I'm not sure who's addressing this.
That's me.
That's you?
Yeah, it's just to give an update about what's going on with external relations, our relationship with the FERC, relationship with the coalition against the pipelines that was formed by the CSU and SSNU. It has about 6 members at the moment. And then as well to just give an overview of what's happening outside of Concordia University at other university campuses. There's talks about strikes happening in other schools. There's a big fight against austerity measures and compressions in university budgets. And a lot going on around hydrocarbons and fossil fuels. So I guess I'll start with the FERC. There's a Congress on the weekend. Terry and I will be attending. I'm going to be the FERC Works, where you have different commissions. I'm involved in the institutional affairs and the social political commissions. Terry's involved in academic and also the institutional affairs. We kind of just share that together. So on the weekend, we're adopting a research proposal on climate change, something that the CSU has been pushing for about, well, it is the one that pushed for it. So then it ended up that a research proposal was created. I looked it over with the VP social political of the FERC, and there's going to be some slight changes made to it based on recommendations made by a few different groups. But it looks like we're going to approve something and have something ready by April. FERC has also let us know that they're interested in doing a second research proposal, specifically on the pipeline, so that the FERC have a position on the pipeline that can be adopted as well in April. Besides that, in institutional affairs, there's going to be a research proposal coming up that we will have to approve on the issue that FERC has about low representation of women in the decision-making bodies. So that was something that CSU brought up last year, and then there's a bit moving forward on that. So I'm going to be looking over the research proposal once it comes in and discussing with the rest of the executive how we want to move forward with this, and then meeting with one of the vice presidents of the FERC to see if we have any recommendations to make, and then talking to other schools as well about it. Besides that, the last FERC Congress of the year is going to be, this mandate is going to be in April. So there's going to be orientation Congress. So we're going to have to bring, the FERC executive is going to bring up orientations for the next year. And we get to make changes to it and propose our own orientations. So that's going to be coming up. We're actually asking the FERC on this weekend to move it a week ahead. So not April 11th and 12th, but April 3rd and 4th, so that it doesn't coincide with a demonstration happening in Quebec City organized by labor unions and environmental groups around climate change. The FERC is on the coordinating committee of this demonstration, so is the CSU. I'm there on behalf of the CSU. And then there's also somebody from the Coalition Against the Pipelines that will be present there. So it looks like there's going to be a big demonstration, mobilization for a demonstration in Quebec City. It looks like we can have buses paid for, not by us, so that's great. And it looks like we're going to be able to get campuses all across Quebec to come to this demonstration. So starting next week, we're looking at helping finance a outreach person with other schools to go out and start calling student associations across Quebec to come to Quebec City and set them up with buses. The initiative of the Coalition Against the Pipelines, we're going to be organizing a student congress We were supposed to do this late January, early February, but we're going to be postponing it for Quebec City. So we're going to organize a student congress on climate change. That's going to be taking place the 12th in Quebec City, and we're going to be asking student representatives from every student association in Quebec to be present. So we're renting a room of about 250 seats. And we're going to have a meeting where the order of the day, or the agenda, is going to be specifically on climate change, on the academic side, the pipelines, and what Quebec is doing or not doing to take on this issue. And then I'll also talk about a fall mobilization, because in the fall there's going to be a Paris Convention, where world government, where governments are going to be voting on a successor to the Kyoto Protocol, which I'll remind the council that Canada pulled out of, the only country in the world to do. So that's kind of how it's lining up at the FERC, and as well as the mobilization. So I'm going to have much more information at the next council about the mobilization. So the logistics committee for the demonstration is only going to be meeting sometime later this week. There's a communications committee as well that's going to be coming up with the messaging. And there is also a counter summit. I'm part of that discussion with the FTQ and Greenpeace. So with the counter summit, the student part of it is going to be really the student congress. There's going to be some students that are going to be organizing something else, maybe a type of encampment and a more grassroots type of summit happening. We're not entirely sure where. Those discussions are going to be happening in the near future, but there's quite a bit of time. We have about 2 months and 2 weeks before Quebec City. Besides the Quebec City mobilization, actually, is there any questions on the Quebec City mobilization? Because I'm just going to go to another point. Okay, then around austerity, there's going to be a big there's a big mobilization push for April 2nd. ASSE is going to be organizing a national demonstration against austerity measures. We haven't yet decided whether or not we're going to be participating, but given that we have a referendum question in which we have to, which mandates us to oppose cuts to public services and education, this seems to fall totally in line with it, so we're going to be discussing the question soon. Other schools seem to be going ahead with it, and at the FERC there's going to be a discussion about it this weekend. The FERC also participated in demonstrations against austerity last semester, since more and more student associations are addressing the question. There seems to be a majority of students that think that compressions in university budgets is a bad idea, and so are cuts to public services. On the coalition front against the pipelines, so right now I am in contact with all the different members. We're putting together a new website. We're going to be hiring this outreach person to go and invite people to the student congress and get people out to Quebec City, and to recruit new members for the coalition. And we're going to be launching a fundraiser drive that we put together with other schools to go get money to finance our campaigns. ECO is not a fee levy group, so it's not like the FERC where we put money into it, so it all depends on donations. So we're going to be going to look for donations from civil society. So we have a video coming up next week or the week after, and a website that's going to be launching next week or the week after. So all this is lining up very well. It's all in the works, and I'll have more information about this next council meeting. I think that is about it for external relations. I guess one to mention is that there might be student strikes happening in other schools in March. There was a vote today at FSPED. I haven't seen the results. FSPED is political science and philosophy. I believe that's a political science and law at UQAM, and they're one of the largest faculties. So I don't know what the outcome was, but it was to launch a strike March 21st if a certain amount of student associations vote on going on strike. So usually the way it works is you would have, we would go on strike if, let's say, 30,000 other students vote on going on strike. So then so if that ceiling's passed, then March 3rd, 21st, the different schools go on strike. So there's going to be quite a few schools voting on strike mandates against austerity. But what's nice to see is that they've also included the question of hydrocarbons and the pipelines in it. So it's an outright rejection of austerity and the fossil fuel projects in Quebec. And a lot of that work was done around pushing for on the environmental front by students at Concordia and in the Anglophone schools. So it's nice to see that that has come at the forefront of student mobilization in other schools. So it'll be interesting to follow what happens on the Francophone campuses. There's also talks in labor unions to start strikes around May Day. So I believe there was a vote, and I'm trying to remember the union, but yeah, there's talks about social strikes on May Day. So that's interesting, and we'll follow it. But at the moment, yeah, we'll have to see how mobilized people are on the ground around that time, and the strikes will be around, yeah, all the changes that are coming because of the austerity measures of the Cuidar government.
So, thank you very much. I had Vicky and then Marion.
Is there a plan or a discussion to go on strike to protest against those austerity measures?
None. No. I don't think I ever discussed it with anyone on the exec or in our committee. But there's no plans for a strike at the CSU level.
Okay, Marion.
Kind of in the same theme there, but since we do have an anti-austerity mandate at CSU, I was wondering how much you see your role in terms of supporting student associations at Concordia that do actually have the potential to go on strike, such as smaller associations in ASFA or FASA, some other associations that would kind of have that legitimacy to go on strike because they work through different structures than the CSU does. And do you think that your committee or yourself will be doing any work to support those groups, since CSU does have an anti-austerity mandate? And in terms of March 21st, or even just a punctual strike on the 2nd of April, since there'll be that demo. I was just wondering how you envision that.
Our role wouldn't be to mobilize people to go on strike, but if there are students that are mobilizing in different faculties to go on strike, and then they're looking at having help in with resources, then that's something that we're going to look into. But at the moment, we're not going to actively try to mobilize students to go on strike at Concordia.
Ben?
I'm taking a risk in saying this, but technically the interest on the Student Space Fund, the part of the accessible education part of SILC, the SSAELC, accessible education, the interest in the event of a binding strike mandate can be used to defend accessible education. And I think there's something to be said about having well-preserved publicly funded universities and fighting for that to be maintained as something that would qualify as defending accessible education. So while a formal strike may make no sense, I just want to throw it out there into the collective student psyche that, I don't know, maybe there could be something played with there. I'm not necessarily making that recommendation, but I'm just throwing that idea out.
Okay. All right, if there's nothing further to add on this point. I spoke with James before he left, and point 8D had already been addressed during the point for appointments. So that takes us to new substance of business, point 9A, which is the Loyola office relocation.
Okay. So for those who didn't read the Loyola committee minutes, which I assumed you all did, we spoke about this at Loyola committee and voted to sort of fund the Loyola office moves using the CLEC fund to fund it. So in brief, the Loyola offices, the CSU offices at Loyola are being moved into this building actually, the CC building, which is a much better location and it's more space. But most importantly, it's creating a whole separate office just for the services of the CSU, so for the Legal Information Clinic, the Advocacy Center, and HOJOs. And by doing that, we would need a whole bunch more furniture, IT equipment, office equipment, all these things that we don't have here at Loyola. So the CSU offices, we have the desks and stuff, but the new offices just for services, we don't have any of that. So the current office coordinator at the CSU is like really bottom lining that part of the project in terms of furnishing and setting up the new office. So together we developed a budget that we reviewed at Loyola committee. I should pass this around. If anyone wants to see where the $12,000 came from, I'll just pass them around, and if you can like take one for every 2 or 3 people, there should be enough for everyone. So yeah, so I could just read the motion. I should have started with the motion, but is it alright if I read the motion? No. So whereas Loyola office move will see the creation of a new service office space on Loyola campus, whereas furniture as well as office and IT equipment for that office is non-existent and would require purchasing, be resolved that a maximum of $12,000 be allocated from the Student Space, Accessible Education, and Legal Contingency Fund for the purpose of purchasing furniture as well as office and IT equipment for the new Loyola offices. So that's the motion.
Okay, so if you want to further motivate, maybe we'll get seconded first. Fatty, great.
So yeah, like I said, we need to buy furniture and IT and office equipment for the new services office. And say like fund, seeing as its purpose to improve student space, seems like the perfect place to be able to go and get the funding to do that. And yeah, in terms of other further updates, it seems like the timing for the construction to finish and all this to be done is either right before spring break or right after. So somewhere around that time, that's what the university is letting us know, is the most likely time that we'd be able to actually move into this office. So I'll continuously keep updating the Loyola committee on whatever happens on that front. And yeah.
Concerning the IT equipment, what kind of office suite and basically what kind of operating system would those computers be running on?
I'm assuming the regular VMware the CSU use, but I think Charles really wants to answer this.
No, that's what Gabe said. It's just the regular VMware, which is a Windows server setup that we have. So it would be hooked up to the main system that we have.
Follow up?
Yeah. Are we talking about what kind of Windows version?
Wouldn't be able to give you that answer right now, but I can get it for you for next council meeting.
Okay.
I can send it to you.
Because if it is basically Windows XP, I can tell you that it is extremely vulnerable to basically computer attacks.
Off the top of my head, I think it's Windows Server 2008, but I
Okay.
can verify.
Okay.
I'm not
Good.
sure.
So we're currently on the speakers list for the motion for the approval of using self-fund money for the Loyola office relocation. Any further questions? Have you all gotten a chance to? No, this is the discussion for the motion. Has everyone got a chance to look at the report? Okay, Ben?
I shouldn't say I'm fairly confident that the fund committee would approve this.
Thanks. Gib?
Talking too much. It seems that the reason we decided $12,000 is to allow us a significant buffer so that we don't have to come back to council midway in the purchasing if there's unforeseen things that we need to purchase that we didn't account for. But most likely we'll look at, if we look at the budget, we already have a cushion in the budget. It'll be less than $9,000. That's in terms of for council to know how much it's going to cost. It'll be around $9,000. But we want to give ourselves enough cushion so that we don't have to come back to council. I mean, potentially call it a special council meeting just for this one item in order to move forward. So yeah.
Okay. If the speakers list is totally exhausted, then we can proceed to a vote. All right, so those in favor of the motion for the Loyola office relocation? Those opposed? Abstentions? Okay, that carries. Thank you very much. Point 9B, the referendum question positions book. I'm not sure whose point that is either.
It's been tabled.
That was a tabled item? Okay. In that case, that takes us to the end of new substantive business. I see. So I confused the elections item with that item I just mentioned, which makes point 9B the elections point. Okay. Would someone like to address the point elections? Yeah, Ben.
Yeah, notwithstanding standing regulation 276, be resolved that the nomination period for the 2015 general elections shall begin on March 2nd and end at the end of the day as defined by the CEO on March 6th, 2015.
Okay, that's a motion.
I move to amend. Can I amend?
No, there has to be a
I'm going to
second.
second and then I'm going to amend. Is that okay?
So that's been seconded. Ben, can you further motivate?
So the motivation is the CEO has recommended that we shorten the nomination period. Last year we made it 10 days instead of 5 days. That was because of, I guess, people were trying to encourage additional involvement. We don't have that issue currently. Not the same issue that was had, as you might recall. The by-elections 2 years ago had about 450 people that were in them. So, and then the elections following those were uncontested, basically. But that has not been the case recently. So, anyways, the CEO recommended that we shorten it. What to 5 days, also because this is, if we have it 10 days, then it's this awkward period where there's the February break in between. And also it doesn't give the CEO enough time to prepare. He has to hire a team and things like this. So this gives them the February break to do a lot of the logistical work that they need to do. So March 2nd is immediately following the break, basically, and then to the 6th, that's Monday to Friday. And then the campaign period would begin the Tuesday following. So that's, yeah, this is basically just running off the recommendation of the CEO. He didn't have enough time to prepare last time because of late resignations from council, but this time we were a little bit ahead because, anyways, we don't have to deal with that. And there's a fixed date for the elections, so we know when it's going to happen in advance. But yeah.
Can I propose an amendment? I
maybe
move.
before that, could we get the motion reread then for secretary?
Yeah, the motion is notwithstanding standing regulation 276, be it resolved that the nomination period for the 2015 general election shall begin on March 2nd and end at the end of the day as defined by the CEO on March 6th, 2015. And standing regulation.
Maybe just once more.
Slower.
Okay, notwithstanding standing regulation 276, be it resolved that the nomination period for the 2015 general elections shall begin on March 2nd and end at the end of the day as defined by the CEO on March 6th, 2015.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So Vicky, go ahead.
I move to amend that nomination period shall start on March 2nd, 8 a.m. and shall end on March 6th, 5 p.m.
Okay, so that's the amendment. Is there a seconder to it?
It's fine.
Oh, okay. So you're signaling that's a friendly amendment? Yeah, Ben?
That's fine. I think that makes sense. That's when it would be, but that's why I put in it defined by the CEO in case, because sometimes the CEO will accept nominations afterwards, but it's pretty much what the CEO would say anyways. But even if we met it, then the CEO may still be able to change it according to how he wants, but it's the gist of it's the same.
Okay. Well, does everybody, council, see that as a friendly amendment then? Great. Okay, so that carries. That brings it back to the main motion. Because this is open, does anyone have any questions or comments about it? Yep, Betty?
Just a quick question. What are the dates for the election?
Ben?
So in the regulations, they have to be held such that the last day of the polling period is on the last Thursday of March. So that brings us to about the 26th, I think. One sec, I'll check specifically. Yeah, it's the 26th. And then there's 3 days of polling, so 24th, 25th, and 26th. That's the polling period, and then 10 days prior to that, that's the campaign period. And then nominations, yeah, starting on March 2nd. So it's between March 2nd and March 26th.
Thank you.
Yeah. Would it be possible to know why is reading week later than usual in terms of the calendar of the university?
I think Terry.
Yeah. It's because the semester started later, so everything gets pushed back. That's why exams are going to be in April, and last classes will also be later in April.
Okay.
Yeah.
If that exhausts the speakers list, we can proceed to a vote. Okay, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your placards. Those opposed? Abstentions? Okay, very good, that carries. Thank you very much. So with point 9b concluded, this takes us to question period and business arising. Maybe for myself, I'd like to address something beforehand. According to the bylaws, by now, this is the first meeting of the new semester. I ought to have completed the student status check for the semester. I've been speaking with David Baker, the Dean of Students, between the A&E deadline, which was the 20th, and today, and it wasn't able to be completed. It's been submitted. However, he said that a new student information system at the Dean of Students office is causing us to take further time than he had anticipated, saying that it's quite complicated. However, it's been submitted, and what I'd like to propose to council is that rather than submit it at the next regular council meeting, which is far away, once I do receive it, I can forward it as a confidential email to council and the executives, which they can then see and peruse as they see fit. Or, yeah, okay. Terry.
Sorry, were you seeking like a formal?
It's something I intend to do. If you folks want to mandate me to do it, that's fine. Yeah, Matthew.
Is there any sensitive information on it, or is it just like student name and number?
Yeah, I mean, student ID and name is sensitive to that.
Okay, but that's the extent of the information, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, like, yeah, whether or not you're a student may or may not be
That's
sensitive
it.
depending on.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, okay. Marcus?
I'm pretty sure we were mandated by that motion earlier from people in the VA department to take one of our meetings in the VA building, and I hope there's a plan in place. It's happening.
Yeah, a couple enthusiastic hands.
We're supposed to have it there this meeting, or no, we're
Next
supposed to have
meeting,
it there.
but it's going to be March.
Yeah, at the next meeting, but it's in March instead. Yeah. Thank you, Jeremy.
Yeah, no, we had booked the space, but just with how everything's running, it's going to be in March instead. But it was booked for February, but now it's going to be March.
Are we announcing?
We're at question periods and business arising. I guess counts as a question. If there are no further questions or any new upcoming business, we can move to announcements. Yeah. Okay, Ben and Anthony.
Actually, a quick announcement. I just wanted to follow up because at the last meeting we said that we were going to hold a clubs event to kind of provide information about all the kind of larger scale projects we're having, and that's happening now. Not this week, but the following week, or not the. It's happening on, hold on, I get the specific date. It's on February 10th. Yes, February 10th. So we're having that, and that's just one part of like a much larger communication effort that we're going to be making for the project. So, yeah, that's just an update.
Yeah, just a call out there for help from members of council for mobilizing students. We need as many students to come out for the Lord of the Rings marathon, which is going to be on February 14th in the H110 auditorium. So it's 11 and a half hours of Lord of the Rings, all 3 extended editions on a Saturday, 700 seats. So if you could spread the word, that'd be great. Share it on Facebook. We need to fill it. That's it. That's the announcement. I'll take questions.
To remove Anthony speaking.
You may certainly not. Jason.
Now the important question, is this going to be the original cut or the extended cut?
Extended editions.
Oh yeah.
First time in Montreal on the big screen. So it'll be a fun.
That's great. Are there any other announcements then? Yeah, Marion.
I would just like to announce the What is Austerity Teach-In Week, which is happening next week, so the 2nd to the 7th of February. You might have seen me put them diagonally over those beautiful posters that say What is Austerity and then have the 6 facets. So there are many, many events happening next week at all different times during the day. It's organized mostly by Solidarity Concordia, and so you can look at the poster. There's also flyers around, so please let your member associations know if you're in other student associations. Really good opportunity for students to find out more about what's going on with austerity and the cuts and how it affects students in other sectors.
Thank you. So, Charles and Marcus?
Just wanted to remind everyone tomorrow CSU is doing an event at Crowbar. It's called Winter Blues. We have 5 different artists playing. First person Gabriel is going to be playing the fiddle. With some river dance music. It's going to be pretty cool. Then we have a French folk band, Sweetgrass, who are playing afterwards. And then we have 2 others that are playing the, what was it called? The banjo. 2 other artists playing the banjo, and 1 other person playing the accordion. So it's going to be an interesting night. And they're all playing their saddest music.
All right, thank you. So Marcus and Lucy.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Marion, could you put that on the Facebook group?
Sure.
Thanks.
2 things for the remainder of this week. One, most fee levy groups on campus are allowing for opt-outs this week. There's been advertisements on Facebook, on posters in the hall. You can check concordiacommunity.org if you wish to opt out of any fee levy group. It's usually during office hours or by appointment. Most of them are very flexible with that. If you do want to opt out of one or any fee levy groups, because that's something you can do. Second, this week has been the First Voices Week, which has been a really amazing week of programming, workshop screenings from students in the First People Studies program. I know the Community Public Affairs Student Association has helped out. I think the CSU has as well. Full program is on Facebook, but there's some really good talks coming up tomorrow and Friday. There's going to be at the Hive on a Friday night. I believe it's a new reggae artist. I'm not sure the details on that, but it's yeah, it's like really exceptional programming organized by students with speakers from across the country. So check that out. First Voices Week, and that's it.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead. Please.
So just concerning clubs, where the deadline for the late winter submission of the budget was January 22nd, which means that all the new clubs that have registered end of fall semester are now submitting their budget template according to the new form that we created. Also, a lot of clubs that have been registered back in the summer period have not submitted a budget until now and have been like kind of creating events, paying their own pocket. It's been very messy for some students, but overall we're gonna process this with the Clubs and Space Committee very soon. The past week I've been compiling and organizing all the data that we have received in the past few weeks, and other than that we're working on the club's content. And also February 10th, we're going to have an event in order to discuss the Reggie's project, the same presentation that we offered to all the council at the retreat. So during that period of time, we're going to provide the club's booklet and club's manual that have been updated by the designers recently. So things are moving forward, and the Clubs and Space Committee are going to meet every week for all those that are part of it. That's it.
Thank you very much.
Am I the last person on speaker's list?
You are.
I move to adjourn.
I second.
Oh, sorry, did you want to address something before adjournment?
Yeah, I did, but I was putting my hand on my tracker. It's my fault.
Okay.
Can I direct respond to that?
Just 1 second.
So I have a last announcement, actually. So sorry to kill your.
I already moved to.
Okay. So, yeah, I just wanted. I know most people know about it, but I want to send a reminder for Concordia transitions. I don't know if you're interested in coming. If you can't make it, even telling your friends is really helpful. So just sharing through your networks is something that could be really great for the conference. In general, we had it last year, and it was a really successful conference, and a lot of momentum was built around the food campaign on campus. So just sharing information online is really helpful. If you want to come, your tickets are available at the CSU, and that's it. But I think I've spoke to most of you about it, but I just wanted to. Everybody was saying all their awesome events, so I wanted to talk about transitions too.
All right, well, I'm sorry, Marcus, but you can second Ben's motion to adjourn if you like.
Yeah, sure.
Anyone opposed to adjournment?
No.
Well, just like a quick announcement. There's
Okay.
a photography sale on the 14th, and the same day of Lord of the Rings. You can watch your movie and get a sweet photo print from the print department. So, yeah, that's it. No.
Okay. Adjournment.